Okay, so there's your common module rubric. I won't read through it in full. But from the rubric, we see both the concepts and the skills that you need to be taking away. For example, students explore and analyse, so your ability to get into the ideas that the texts are conveying. And the concepts, of course, are the phrases such as the anomalies, right, of human experiences, the qualities of human experiences. So one thing that I often suggest for my students to do is to print off a copy of the rubric, highlight all of the key terms, the concepts that are raised, and to make sure that you know what they mean, to define them, and also to have ways of expressing them in your own way. You know, an anomaly, right? A departure from a norm. That is something that is unexpected that arises in the human experience. So being well versed in those concepts and knowing how to express them will help you, because when you are confronted with them in the exam, in the question, you've already got terms that you can call upon to explain what those terms mean in light of the text you're given. In essence though, the rubric is essentially asking us what defines us as humans and what is common to our humanity. So write down those two questions. They're kind of like my ways of summarising all of the subpoints that are raised in the rubric. What defines us as humans? The fact that we have qualities, the fact that we experience collective human experiences, that we feel, we have emotion, and what is common to our humanity? What are some needs that all humans encounter? And by extension, what are some inconsistencies that we may confront in our human experiences? What are some paradoxes that arise? So being very familiar with the terms means that when you're in the exam and we have a question, it's quite easy for you to identify in what direction the question is leading you, because you're well versed in the rubric. And if you've got your own turns of phrase to explain the rubric, you've already got some language you can call upon to help flesh out your response. So be familiar. What I've done on this slide is I've summarised, in my view, the main 8 areas of the rubric. So question the meaning behind being human, which harks back to my earlier question, what defines us as human? Understand how experiences might give rise to qualities or emotions. For example, you know, how a challenging experience might give rise to the quality of resilience. And I might just pause there, jumping ahead slightly. When you see these words in questions, it's really important that you don't just restate the question in your topic sentence. What I mean by that is if we have a question that reads, how does this text explore qualities of human experiences or qualities that are provoked through human experiences? You want to ask yourself, well, what qualities does the text actually explore? Does it explore the quality of hope or of strength or of empathy? You know, you need to understand those key rubric terms so you can add something to them and actually identify what they are in the text that you're studying. A key technique that we'll come to when we look at practice questions is your ability to apply micro questions to the key terms in the question. Words such as what, how, why, to what extent, to draw some extra meaning out of the question's key terms and add something to them to show that you actually understand the question that you're being given. This will make more sense when we look at practice questions. But the point that I'm flagging now is that if you've looked at these key terms and you've asked yourself critically, well, what are some qualities, what are some emotions that I see in my prescribed text that I can call upon in the exam and quickly identify in the text that I'm given in comprehension, it allows you to get into that habit of avoiding merely repeating the question, but actually offering something in response to it. Be able to draw and reflect on your own experiences. Some questions do ask you to engage personally with the text. You know, how has this text provoked you to see the world differently is a key word in the rubric. Or how does this challenge your preconceptions of human experiences? Explain anomalies, paradoxes, inconsistencies. Anomaly, if we think about the etymology, the root of that word, means something that is not normal, anormal. It's a departure from what we would expect. So know what that term is, know how to explain it, because it might come up in a question. A paradox. where we have two opposing ideas that are placed in direct proximity. A paradox might be that an unfamiliar setting helps to awaken within you a familiar emotion. How going into a new space, something that is unfamiliar to you, might draw out a nostalgic experience from the past. That's paradoxical. Inconsistencies. A lot of students often ask, what's the difference between anomaly and inconsistencies? I'd say they're fairly similar, but an inconsistency is merely something that doesn't fit with what we're expecting. It's inconsistent perhaps with preconceived beliefs, whereas anomaly is specifically a departure from an established norm. So there's a slight nuance. Human behaviour and motivations. How do our motivations influence our behaviours? If we're motivated by a selfish quality, we might behave in a way that is unempathetic. These are just examples of how you can draw out meaning from these terms. You want to appreciate how texts encourage us to see the world differently or challenge assumptions or ignite new ideas. With that, you need to consider the authorial intent behind a text. I would put a point next to that rubric idea. What is the purpose behind the text that I'm studying? And that's where form often comes into play. If a text is driven by the intent to persuade us, that may be why it's chosen a speech or an auditory form, right? Because auditory texts, oral texts, their use of rhetoric, their use of rhetorical questions, anaphora, their effect orally on us as responders can persuade us. So think about that. What I would note down is correlation between authorial intent and form. Appreciate the role of storytelling. You know, how do stories that warn us about their contexts or warn us about the paradigms of their time, how do they help future contexts, right? If you're looking at a text like 1984 or The Crucible, how does the allegory of that text or the stories that they tell help us navigate our way through contemporary contexts? How do they also preserve experiences from the past? Why is that important? Analyse divergent perspectives on events, personalities, situations, or mindsets. How we can analyse a certain point in time from multiple lenses or points of view. And motivations and behaviour, which is also raised earlier on. So don't just read the rubric and leave it there. In light of your prescribed text that you'll be writing an essay on in section 2, I would go through each of those rubric terms and I would do two things. I would brainstorm how each of those terms relate to my text and flesh them out. And I would also do a practice essay using my exemplar on every single one of those rubric points. But also breaking down those terms, like thinking about what are all of the different qualities or emotions that are raised in my prescribed text that a question could be based on. And the more practices you do, the more equipped you are going into the exam. A few years ago, when love was the question for Crucible, right? Students were confronted thinking, well, that's not a fair question. Human emotions is one of your first points. So had you looked at both the emotions that are raised in the text, but also the emotions that are not there, which actually complicate the text, the lack of love, the lack of empathy, you're exposing yourself to all of the different possibilities in the exam. And if you know that your exemplar is equipped to deal with all of those practices, you should know that you can be confident going into the exam using what you've pre-prepared. That's what it's all about. So harking back to what Johnny mentioned earlier on, prepare early, prepare all of your exemplars, get them done as soon as you can. And once they're done, I'd be ploughing through the rubric, ploughing through practice papers and testing, if not writing out a full response, at least knowing how your thesis statement would be written, and your topic sentences would be adjusted to adhere to the question that you've been given.